Many times editing is about when not to cut, when to have the silence, when to let the moment be itself. The musicality of Places in the Heart is one of the things that is the strongest. And I don't mean the score. I mean the musicality and the way that the scenes flow together, the ambience of that rural Texas, summer, hot, with the cicadas. And there's a four-square Protestant feeling. After her husband has been shot by this drunk black kid on the railroad tracks, there were no funeral parlors, couldn't afford one anyway in the Depression. The body was brought back to the home and laid out on the dining room table where they just had Sunday dinner. An incredibly moving moment. And we just held on her and held on her and held on her and held on her.
We would have been married 15 years this October. We had 2 children. And I never knew till just now where I had a scar right there.
And it was just exquisite, moving, beautiful. If we had cut it, it would have destroyed everything.
Editing is like poetry. It has to do with rhythms. It has to do with visual. It's visual poetry.
The digital revolution has further enhanced the poetic powers of the editor. George Lucas, who began his career as an editor, is one of the pioneers of this new technology.
All art is technology. That's the very nature of it. The artist is always bumping against that technology. And the advent of, whether it's a new color of blue, whether it's a proscenium arch, whatever it is, it changes the way we work in that art form.
With computer technology, editors now can make changes within the frame, adding or removing elements from the original image. This increases the editor's control, but also multiplies the number of decisions to be made.
Now you can edit what I call in 3D, which is you have a scene and you have people in the scene, and you can cut those people out, you can move them around in the scene, you can go in for a close-up, you can go out. You can sort of direct the film in the editing room, which is, growing up as an editor, what I've always wanted to do.
The new technology also makes it possible to cut the movie before shooting begins. Pre-visualization gives an editor much more input in planning the movie.
And I have a system now, because of the digital world, I have a group of kids really do little videomatics of things, and we have a little blue screen. We can send these editors in and shoot scenes on just an amateur video camera. And so I can actually shoot the film and make the film and write the film right there in the editing room. Every main character in our movie has a digital counterpart. We have totally virtual actors now, and we use them quite a bit. Mostly we use them for stunts and things. And we have a lot of situations where it's better to use a digital actor than it is to use a real actor. Christopher Lee, who's 80 years old, he can't really fight the way he did in Attack of the Clones. You're not going to get an artificial intelligence computer that's neurotic enough to be able to understand how you create a performance. Performance is an art.
At the end of the day, all this stuff has to work to tell a story. And if you're not telling a story, it doesn't matter how much razzle-dazzle there is. It's not about the tools, it's about the story.
In many ways, we're the last storyteller. The movie's been written by the writer, and then it's directed, and then it comes to the last storytelling, which is in the editing process.
The last draft of the screenplay is the first cut of the movie, and the final cut of the movie is the last draft of the script.
An editor can take a sequence that a director shot and reconfigure it in such a way that it becomes a whole different sequence, which is much more beneficial to the movie.
Bob Fosse, we've heard him as a collaborator on his movies, and I don't think there can be a greater compliment for an editor to be called a collaborator, to really to have that function.
And now, a word about dykes. Bah! I like dykes.
How could you say that?
Lenny was a biographical film of the comedian Lenny Bruce, who was often arrested for taking language to the legal limits of where it could go in the late 50s.
The most wonderful thing that happened in it was near the end of the production. We had to show the film to the producer.
And the script for the film was the best script I ever read. But we were having a problem. we hated the ending.
You're trying to stop the information.
Hey, look, will you please remove this man from the courtroom?
It was just not coming together. When Lenny is dragged out of the courtroom, his life is effectively over. Between that period and the time of his death, there was 20 minutes of material. And I turned to Bob and I said, why don't we just kill the son of a bitch? I took out 2 reels of film. And I went straight from, you can't stop the information, to Lenny's body on the floor. And that was about the most exciting thing I've ever done in a cutting room. I mean, we just loved that.
The opening scene of Apocalypse is a good example of what you can achieve editorially that is not based on the original script. There were some collisions of images that occurred to Francis as he was shooting the film that were at variance with how he had planned to begin the film originally.
The trees being napalmed was originally shot for the surfing scene, which comes much later in the film.
There was a shot of jungle bursting into slow motion flames with helicopters flying at odd angles in slow motion through the frame. And when Francis saw that shot in dailies, which was, I think, simply done to record this explosion, it wasn't intended to use it in the finished film. But he looked at it and said, that's the film right there. This jungle, flames, helicopters.
The Martin Sheen character was one that was shaped very significantly in the editing room. The film itself was shot with the idea that there would be a narrative glue to hold the film together. What exactly that glue was and who the character of the narrator really was really not shaped until well into the post-production process.
Willard punches the mirror, blood comes out of his hand. All of this is really happening. That's real blood. That's Marty Sheen. None of that was intended to happen. That was just Francis saying, Marty, let's shoot an improvisation with you trapped in your room and what is going to happen.
I think as we worked on the film, we realized that the film itself was in its own strange way a kind of modern opera. And the reality of dealing just in the beginning with the Martin Sheen character, it was not sufficient to give the audience not only the emotional state with which to enter the film, but the visual iconography of the film itself.
Going through the dailies of the film, I collected a number of images of the Cambodian heads, burning images from the end, and worked them in through a series of multi-level dissolves with the burning napalm and the helicopters flying through, and then images of Willard's room and Willard asleep, and he's trapped in this nightmare. You have been hearing helicopter sounds, and now you see this ceiling fan, and what you're hearing is the whap, 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 whap sound of a helicopter. Is that coming from his dream? Is it a reality? Is somehow that sound coming from the fan? I remember when I was assembling those images, almost jumping away from the editing machine when I put that sound with that image, because it seemed to me that that fan was making that sound, even though I knew it was impossible. And then if it was convincing me who was doing it, it surely would convince others. Now they begin to coalesce, and they turn into a real helicopter coming from a fan. No. And then you hear a real helicopter fly over the room. Willard gets up out of bed, goes over to the window, and says,
Saigon. Shit.
All of that, the narration and the helicopter flying over and the napalm jungle, is concocted into something that is a powerful beginning to a film, not only powerful in and of itself, but powerful in the way that it sets the stage for the journey that this particular film is going to take.
Obviously, great directors give you great material to work with, but the ultimate film that you see is the edited version, and it's the editor is greatly responsible for that.
I find my work absolutely fascinating and absorbing. I sat down to work, and 30 years went by without my noticing it.
It's true. When I go into an editing room in the morning, I edit. My assistant has to remind me it's lunchtime. Or Stephen has to come in and say, hey, Mike, why don't you stop for a while or something? Because time goes by like that. You're building a whole other world. You're building a whole construct.
There's a joy on one level in that it's very much like putting a puzzle together. I have thousands and thousands of pieces, and how do I tell the story? And this goes before that, no, that doesn't. Or actually, I only need half of that.
The job is not unlike the Talmudic scholar who goes and sits and argues about the book over and over again, always coming up with new answers that are just more subtly refined than the last answer.
To sit in a theater at a preview and to hear an audience laugh at that moment when you expect to laugh and it comes back at you, or to hear an audience shuffling and crying because it's so sad and you expect that moment to really happen that way, that's so marvelous. It tells you what power we have.
I believe in people's being able to learn, because otherwise, what's the point? We're all going to, you know, be past one of these days. And how are we going to take this fantastic thing called film and motion pictures and storytelling unless we pass it on and teach people how to do it?